Welcome to Transforming Your Life Through Storytelling. Have you ever wondered how a tiny country like Israel still stands today? It is a question that echoes through history and one that I have come to many times on this channel, not just from a political and military perspective, but from a spiritual one. Because time and time again, Israel seems to defy the odds, facing armies many times its size, enduring threats from every direction, and somehow surviving, thriving. And behind that survivor, there are stories, some documented, some whispered, and some verified by journalists like Bill McKay. Stories that make you pause and ask, could there be something more than just strategy and political strength? Today, to mark the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, I want to share with you one of those stories. This is the story of General Golani, a man whose courage and perhaps divine destiny changed the course of Israel's future when, by unimaginable grace, he was able to lead a critical defense during the Yom Kippur War. And while that miracle was happening, another one was being orchestrated in secret by President Richard Nixon and Golda Meir. This isn't just military history, it is a testament to faith, destiny, miracles, and what happens when you are meant for more. It began in 1967 during the Six-Day War. Golani was a young lieutenant caught in a brutal battle with Egyptian forces in the Sinai Desert. His tank was hit. Flames erupted. The tank was torn apart and he was thrown into the blast. The explosion was so strong that it threw him into the belly of the machine, flames licking at his uniform. On fire, disoriented, Golani clawed his way out of the burning tank, rolling across the sand, desperately trying to extinguish the flames. And in that moment, blistered, broken, and alone, Golani cried out to God and said, I don't know if there's a God out there, but if there is, I want to make peace with you. And with whatever words he mustered to put together, he offered a prayer from the depths of his soul and said, God, if you want to take my life, I'll give it to you. Now at this point, he didn't see angels, he didn't hear a voice from the sky, nothing miraculous happened yet, except that he lived, he survived against all odds. Golani was rescued and taken to a field hospital. His wounds were severe. According to Israel military standard, it demands a score of 92 for continuous service. He only scored 32. That should have been the end of his combat days. Golani was not fit to return to service. He was done. But then something happened, something small yet world-altering. A military surgeon, moved by Golani's love for Israel, secretly changed the score, unbeknownst to everyone. That decision would later come to save a nation. Fast forward 6 years later, October 6, 1973, Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, a day of fasting, repentance, and national reflection. But when Israel prayed, her enemies plotted. Syria launched a massive surprise attack on the Golan Heights, while Egypt advanced to the south, and their plan was bold. It was devastating: sweep through the Golan down into the valley and take over Tel Aviv. If they couldn't destroy Israel militarily, they were going to destroy it economically. And standing in the way of that entire Syrian armada was one man. You guessed it right, Golani. Now a colonel, a little older, a little wiser, and carrying with him the memory of what happened 6 years ago in that desert. Golani looked out at 600 Syrian tanks bearing down Israel. His unit 4 tanks. Now at that point, he wasn't looking for a miracle, but when he gave the order to charge, according to military testimonies, only his 4 tanks advanced. The Syrian tanks, for some crazy reason, were paralyzed in fear. They couldn't move. And in that moment, Golani understood why he had been saved in 1967, why that sergeant changed the score, and why he was still alive. He was being preserved for this moment. He charged into the storm, and for 72 hours, Golani and his tiny force held off the entire Syrian advance. How? Nobody knows. But he held the line. Now, why is this so significant? While Golani was holding the line, another kind of battle and miracle was taking place behind the scenes. Prime Minister Golda Meir was running out of time and hope. Her generals were already preparing for a government in exile because they did not believe that Israel would survive. Golda Meir turned to the U.S. State Secretary Henry Kissinger, at the time an Austrian Jew who was very cold in his stand towards Israel. He had no intentions of helping. Every channel, every protocol had been exhausted, and then Golda did the unthinkable, a desperate move. She picked up the hotline and called President Richard Nixon directly. And in his biography, he recalls sitting at the edge of his bed, picking up that call from Golda, who pleaded, "Mr. President, Israel is not going to survive unless you help us now." Now, Richard Nixon said something extraordinary. He says, "When I was a little boy living in Whittier, California, my mother would make me read the Old Testament every day. And one day after reading, she pulled me aside and looked at me and said, 'Richard, one day you're going to be in a position of great power. And when that day comes, you must help the Jewish people.'" It was almost as a prophecy. Now, say what you want about Richard Nixon, but he was a very political, astute man, and he knew the consequences of that decision he was about to make, especially because he was in the middle of his own Watergate scandal, and to make that decision without Congress approval meant that he was risking political capital, impeachment, and global backlash. But as crazy as this sounds, because of his mother's words and because of his mother's love for the Jewish people, he decided to stand with them and ask Golda, "What do you need?" And as she started to go down the list, he said, "Stop right there, no need to continue. I'm going to sign an executive decision right now." And what followed was Operation Nickel Grass, the largest overnight emergency airlift of military aid in U.S. history. And that night, Israel received everything it needed to survive. So what is the link between a burning tank in the Sinai and that midnight call to the White House? Some call it fate, some call it history. But those 72 hours the Golani bought for Israel between the time the President Nixon sent the help is now come to be known as what journalist Bill McKay calls the God factor. Israel stands today not just because of brilliant leadership and brave soldiers, but because something greater seems to be watching over her. Miracles are still happening, and history is often more divine than we can imagine. So my message to you, if you are in a time of uncertainty in your life, is to remember that sometimes we survive the fire, not just for us, but for a purpose far beyond what we can see. Like Golani, we may not understand the why in that moment, but one day we just might.